Number 10. Helicoprion. Sharks are one group of animals that humans have an odd fascination with. Maybe it's their strength, or perhaps it's just because of the movie Jaws. Either way, we can't get enough of the aquatic predator. The Helicoprion might just be one of the strangest and most unusual sharks to ever be born into the world, which should not be taken lightly since there are a few other crazy-looking sharks that we'll talk about later. But the reason we mention this is due to the fact that its mouth is crazier than anything we've seen before or since. The Helicoprion was a shark that had an inward-facing mouth, making it resemble a circular saw of sorts. And just like we noted before, no shark, or other sea creature for that matter, has had something like this in years since. Yes, there are saw sharks, but those ones have flat noses that act like saws, whereas this one is a circular buzzsaw. The Helicoprion wasn't too big compared to other massive species of the ancient world, and our current world, as its average size was about 15 feet. However, despite its small size, it had a lot of endurance, since it was part of the 10% of life on Earth to have withstood the Great Permian-Triassic extinction. But the most ironic thing about this shark is that there's some debate on what exactly it ate, and whether it was as vicious a predator as the sharks we know today. Because when you think of sea creatures eating one another, you usually think of images like this. But that clearly couldn't have worked for this ancient shark. So, in short, how in the world did this thing not only catch prey, but eat them? We're not likely to find out without more fossil clues. But if scientists continue to study this strange shark, perhaps one day we'll find out. Number 9. Platybelodon. Let's do something a bit different. Think about the elephants you know and love in our world today. What do you think makes them stand out from the rest of the animals? Most would say it's either their expensive ivory tusks, or their long trunk, or maybe it's their massive ears. Well, the trunk is one of the most important features on an elephant. It acts not only as its nose, but as an extra limb of sorts from which it can use to grab things, move things around, and make calls out to its pack. But 10 million years ago, an ancestor of the elephant was walking around with a very different kind of trunk. It was known as the Platybelodon. The best way to picture them is to imagine if the trunk of the elephant was also a mouth. Yes, we do mean this in the literal fashion, kind of like an anteater. This is quite different from the elephants we have today, and no one is really sure how the Platybelodon could have evolved in a way to have a mouth that big. Not to mention, it just doesn't look like something you'd see in nature, but rather a mishmash of things or a poorly drawn concept, and yet it was very real. And while it did have tusks, they weren't anywhere near the size of modern elephants. This is definitely a case of an animal evolving for the better, because could you imagine one of these elephants walking around in our world today? It'd be terrifying, yet fascinating. Number 8. Stethacanthus. The study of fossils has introduced us to amazing creatures from the Earth's past, one of which was the Stethacanthus. It goes by two other names. One is the anvil shark, while the other is the ironing board shark. This is because when it was born during the late Devonian to early Carboniferous era, which were well over 320 million years ago, it had a very unusual dorsal fin. Most sharks have a fin that helps them cut through the water, making them very aerodynamic and quicker, if you will. However, the Stethacanthus had one that was tall, flat on top, and had spikes coming out of it. These spikes were called dermal denticles, which were pretty much scales, for lack of a better word, that would cover the sharks, but very enlarged versions of them. Furthermore, the denticles also covered the head of the Stethacanthus, truly something unique to the ancient world. The question is though, what were the flat fin and the denticles used for? The obvious answer is to scare away predators, which would make sense given that the shark was only about 3 feet long at max length, but it's a bit hard to prove, as you would expect. Another theory states that these were used in a sort of mating ritual, but to what end is unclear. Fossils of it have been found in North America, Europe, and even Asia. So it was a far-reaching, global shark, and clearly it did enough to survive in the ancient world. It's just not certain as to how. Even though it survived back then, the only things we have to remember it now are fossils. Are you glad some of these creatures are extinct now? Tell us in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video so far. Number 7. Edestus. The Edestidae are some of the lesser-known species of shark from the prehistoric era. They belong to the Edestus genus, and were also known as the scissor-toothed shark due to their mouths. These strange sharks lived in the late Devonian to the early Carboniferous period of history over 400 million years ago, and their mouths were what helped them stand out then and even now. Most sharks have rather basic styles of teeth, but the Edestidae genus had ones that were curved, literally. The top jaw folded upward, while the bottom jaw folded downward. Thankfully, swimmers won't ever have to worry about being bitten by one of these guys. What's more, these sharks only had one set of teeth, which was unlike others of their kind who have teeth that regrow after they get worn or broken off. Due to these facts, it's unclear to many scientists how the scissor-toothed shark was actually able to hunt. The working theory is that they would use the teeth to slash at prey and then eat them after. Scientists do agree though that they were a fierce predator in the waters, mainly because they were over 20 feet in length. So they were clearly a shark species that had to adapt their techniques to get things done right. Number 6. Megatherium. Let's imagine another scenario. This time, picture a sloth. These creatures are dubbed very lazy and slow in the modern world, and for good reason. The catch is that in the Ice Age, there were types of sloths that had much more active and aggressive tendencies. What's more, they were bigger than any sloth you've seen before, and likely bigger than any you could picture, a lot taller than most humans. Meet the Megatherium, a group of ground sloths that grew up to 20 feet long, which is longer than many land creatures today, including elephants. Another unique feature these sloths had were tails, which they used to help fend off predators who got too close for comfort, an adaptation that has since been lost to modern sloths, among other things of course. Like what, you ask? Well, the Megatherium also had giant claws as well as very thick skin, something that no doubt came in handy back then. The Megatherium lived primarily in South America, and despite their offensive capabilities, they were herbivores. The big question here is about the transformation and evolution into their modern forms, because, as outlined, they were powerful characters once upon a time, and now, not as much. In fact, you'd be forgiven for thinking that these two creatures weren't connected at all, because it certainly doesn't seem like they're related based on their appearances. But, as we know, looks can be deceiving. Number 5. Quetzalcoatlus. Quetzalcoatlus might be a mouthful to say, but it's also a mouthful of a prehistoric creature in general. This being was said to have been the largest thing ever to roam the skies in the ancient world, and then, when it would come onto land, it would be massive in height. When it was standing on the ground, it was about 32 feet high, and its wingspan was 36 feet, which is not a typical measurement for flying creatures. And when it walked on land, it would do so on all fours, another thing that isn't typical. As if all of that wasn't enough, the creature had an incredibly long and pointed beak, but no teeth in sight. Further adding to its uniqueness, this bird was thought to be so mighty that it was able to go straight into flight without any issue at all. So while it is crazy looking, clearly it knew how to make things work. Number 4. Charovipteryx. There were many winged creatures of the ancient world, but when it came to the Charovipteryx, we can find a flying creature that boggles people's mind. It's hard to picture how their bodies even worked. You see, this creature was about a foot long and had 4 appendages that would function like its wings. What's the twist, you ask? The back 2 appendages appear to have been very much like the wings of a pterosaur's, and yet the front 2 legs were not only incredibly short, but they didn't resemble wings at all. The result is a very odd-looking creature that makes us wonder how it got to be that way, and how it actually functioned. It's like Mother Nature just tried to make the weirdest-looking animal she could. The belief is that the front 2 legs helped it jump so that it could fly, but in truth, scientists don't know if flying was its thing. As such, many feel that it may have been a creature that glided more than anything, which would make sense given its body structures, but there's just no true way of knowing, unless we travel back in time. Number 3. Deinocheirus. We now move to a very strange-looking ancient creature known as the Deinocheirus. The Deinocheirus looked similar to a bird, and some would say it mimics them in some way, with feathers covering most of its mass. But it was very long and weighed up to 6 tons and walked upright in a way that was very similar to many land dinosaurs. The Deinocheirus was a mystery for quite some time among researchers and scientists. mainly because there have only been partial bones found of the beast. The Dinocaris is believed to have been 3 times as long as its cousins, which puts it at about 60 feet long. This was realized after more bones of the creature were found in 2015. The name Dinocaris actually means terrible hand, as its arms were the first bones of it found, and they're 8 feet in length, while the hands alone are pretty massive. And yet, it's believed that the Dinocaris were vegetarians, which makes you wonder why it evolved its big hands and arms like it did. Maybe it was to gather more fruit. Sounds handy. Either way you look at it though, this is one creature which definitely stands out in the ancient world. And it's honestly not surprising other birds didn't follow suit in its proportions. Number 2. Acanthostega. When you look at an animal, you're usually able to tell right away whether it's a creature of the land or of the sea. Most times, you only need to look at its hands and feet to tell whether it walks or swims. But when it comes to the beast known as the Acanthostega, that line of logic honestly doesn't apply. Believed to existed around 365 million years ago, the Acanthostega are thought to be one of the first creatures on the planet that had a set of recognizable digits on their hands and potentially feet. In fact, on their hands, they had 8 digits. It's still unknown exactly what the feet had. So, because of its 4 limbs and its digits, you'd think that this creature would love to walk on the land. But instead, it preferred life underwater. So much that examination of its body showed that while it did have digits, its body and limbs were more appropriate for water life, such as not having an arm or leg that could bend like an elbow or knee could, which didn't allow the creature to support its own weight on land. But then, why have the digits? We're not quite sure. It clearly evolved to have them, but the purpose behind that is lost to time. Number 1. Opabinia. Getting right to the point, the Opabinia is considered one of the rarest fossil finds in the world. This is in part because the ancient sea arthropod was known to only live on the seafloor, and it was only about 2 to 3 inches in length. So finding a single fossil would have been a hard task, and yet it was done. And when they were found, people were awestruck in a rather confused way. You see, this creature is considered one of the oddest to have ever been born. To prove this, when it was first presented at a panel, the audience laughed, thinking it was just a joke. This is because it had a nose that dropped down off its head that was used to feed a mouth, and it was backwards. As if that wasn't weird enough, the Opabinia had 5 eyes on its head and a fin tail. This is a creature you'd picture being in a sci-fi movie, not something on Earth, even if it existed in ancient times. When examining its body, you'll notice it doesn't have arms or legs, which is why they're believed to have lived primarily on the seafloor, which is backed up by where certain fossils were found in the United Kingdom. It's felt that they would either crawl along the floor looking for particles to eat, or that it would use its fin to slowly move around. Despite all the crazy oddities that this creature possessed, scientists are eager to find more fossils so that they can study it more and learn more about this incredibly odd creature. Thanks for watching. Have you heard of any of these creatures before? Let us know down below in the comments. If you liked today's video, make sure you subscribe. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time. We'll see you next time.